It's Fanatics Fest versus the National. We just saw the two highest profile events in the sports card hobby take place over the last 3 weeks. So naturally, we've got to compare the two. We just got back from Fanatics Fest and had that experience for the first time. What was it like? What went well? What exceeded expectations? And what fell short of expectations? And how does it compare to the National? And the fact that Fanatics Fest and the National were so close together and apparently will continue to be this close together for the next few years. What does it mean for both shows? Who's going to be attending what? And what's the future going to look like? We're going to break this all down right now. And to help me with it, I'm bringing in Ryan Johnson. You know him as CardCollector2. He's coming on the Geoff Wilson Show to have this important discussion. Ryan, welcome back to the Geoff Wilson Show.
Thanks for having me, Geoff. It's good to be back.
I'm glad you made it on today because I know you had a little bit of a travel challenge getting back from New York. There was some bad weather, and you just told me the story off the air, but Thank goodness you finally made it back to Columbus, Ohio, where you are based, in time for us to do this recording today. But that was, I guess, a little bit of an adventure. But that aside, impressions of Fanatics Fest. You're back. You're now looking backwards at the weekend that was. What were your biggest takeaways from having, for the first time ever, just like all of us, gone to this event?
After a crazy week, or a crazy ending to a great week. First thoughts are going to be like, I talked to Stephanie, Mama Breaks, and I said the first thing I noticed right when you walk in is just like, you're just overwhelmed the second you walk in, but from a different perspective than the National, right? The National, just card table after card table, that just kind of like it seems like they just go forever. You walk into the Javits Center, which I'd never been in, and like it seemed really like fancy. That was the word I kept using, is you got the big tall glass ceilings, you've got massive signage everywhere. And then the first entrance we walk into, you've got the basketball hoop, the first take, you've got the hockey rink, you've got the UFC octagon. It was different. So, a lot of thoughts come to mind. I'm sure we're going to get into more here, but it's just, again, that's the one thing I've noticed about these bigger, larger shows, the National and Fanatics Fest, and I know that's what our conversation will be about, but you walk in and it's not a small venture. It's not like, oh, this is cool. It's unlike anything else in the space, and that is that's what I walked away from, is that this is a great first time, but this is going to continue to develop and really be a massive part of the industry going forward.
So your first impression there is interesting. You're commenting on the quality of the convention center, and I am 100% with you. We just went to a convention center in essentially like a Class A convention facility. We just got off of a convention in the National in Cleveland in, quite honestly, what's like probably like a Class D convention facility. I don't even know if they rate convention facilities that way, but if they did, I would give Cleveland a D, and I would give an A to the Javits Center, the IX Center in Cleveland, a D, and an A to the Javits Center in New York. And that is a big deal. The National, honestly, they have been cheap about their convention centers, and they're going to be cheap the next 3 years. I mean, look, Rosemont is better than the IX Center in Cleveland for sure, but Rosemont is still like B level at best. It's not the Javits Center. You still, last time we were in Rosemont in Chicago, we had challenges with the air conditioning. Wi-Fi and cell phone service were in and out. It worked better than it did in Cleveland, but it wasn't perfect by any means, and there were times when it didn't work. You still had lunch lines to get food. You still had limited food options. Bathroom lines weren't bad, but there were still some small bathroom lines at times. Compare that to the Javits Center, where you had tons of really good food options. I mean, you had a giant Starbucks inside the center, for God's sake. You had multiple levels of food options, really good food. Ryan, I had sushi for lunch one day, and it was legit sushi. Like, I had good sushi for lunch. Like, the best thing you can get at the Rosemont Center is like chicken fingers and fries. Like, I had sushi. They had all kinds of good food at the Javits Center. I did not have to wait to get food. I never had to wait once to go to the restroom. The Wi-Fi and the cell phone signal were perfect the entire time. I had zero problems with any of that. And as you said, the place looked totally classy. It's top notch. This is what the card industry is becoming. The card industry is no longer, like stuck in the 70s like it has been for so many years. It no longer needs to be that. It no longer needs to be the dusty old conference center where nothing is great, because that's all anybody can afford, and that's what they want to go to. It can elevate. We're at a point now where it can elevate. This is a much bigger business than this was 5 years ago. Let's go to nice places. You've got a lot of people who are in this now who actually want to treat going to a card show like a family vacation. They've got a little bit of disposable income that they want to put in here. People are coming to these shows and they're spending thousands of dollars in cards and boxes. Let's take them somewhere decently nice where they can have a nice experience while they're in the convention center, and they can have some good food, and they don't have to worry about their cell signal dropping every 4 seconds, and they can go to the restroom without having to wait in line for 20 minutes. This is not too much to ask. And the Javits Center nailed all of those things. And the National certainly did it in Cleveland, and it's not even fully going to the next 3 years in Rosemont, even though it is going to be a better experience than Cleveland for sure. I've heard, since post the video that we did about the National, where we were talking about, like, will Rosemont be big enough? I've had several people in the comments and reach out and say that there's a convention center within Chicago downtown that is a really nice convention center. I think it's a lot like the Javits Center, and it's bigger than the Rosemont Convention Center, and it's super nice and elevated. But we're not going there because the National doesn't want to pay for it. And Fanatics is paying for it. We got to get there. Like, that's where we need to be, in those types of facilities. Fanatics is clearly going to do that. Even the Burbank show in Anaheim, and I'm sorry I'm on a little bit of a rant about this, but
good.
I had the same first impression that you did, and I think something's got to be said, because it's time for this to, like, elevate. Where the Burbank Card Show is when it goes to the Anaheim Convention Center, that's a nice convention center. Like, that's pretty good as well. It doesn't have as much in the way of food options and everything like that like Javits did, but at least it's modern, high ceilings, better feel to the entire thing. Just feels like a little bit of a classier event. And I just feel like we need to step up our card shows a little bit. And certainly Fanatics Fest set the groundwork, set the standard, set a very high bar. And I recognize not every card show can reach that bar, because that's a huge event with tons of money being spent on it. But I'm glad they raised the bar. I'm glad they showed people that it is possible to go to a card show and have good Wi-Fi and not have to worry about that, and have good food choices. It is possible, people. Raise your expectations of what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of that. I mean, there's not really a lot to argue there. I mean, it definitely comes at an expense, though. I mean, I think that is certainly a piece of the conversation. Like, the Fanatics booths, the setup at that event was north of $3,000, right? The National Card Show, I don't own a booth space. We've not set up as a dealer there before on our own, so I can't speak to that, but I think it's like $1,000 some dollars. I think it's like $1,200 or $1,500. So the cost is obviously substantial there. And I also believe another piece of that is like the cost of entry, right? Like, what does it cost for dad and a son to go to the National versus to go to Fanatics Fest? Now, you get other things with it, but going to New York is not cheap. Staying in hotels in New York is not cheap. Like, a lot of the stuff about New York is expensive. So asking a collector with their, a dad and a son, right, if that's our target here, for them to come to New York, to travel to New York, to get in to the show in a major city like that, it's pretty expensive just to get there. Now, again, you say you're treating it like a family vacation. And this is not a knock on the Javits Center. This is not a knock on Fanatics Fest. But I definitely think part of it comes with an expense. Now, I don't have the national numbers. I don't know what they're making. So I don't know what option, what part of that they can take on versus pass on to the dealer, pass on to ticket prices, a lot of that stuff. So I would be curious about that because I feel like the National is much cheaper to get into than Fanatics Fest. But again, like Fanatics Fest, one of the things we were taking away, and I don't want to switch subjects too much, but I felt like there was a lot more stuff for kids at Fanatics Fest than I did at the National for sure. The National is definitely very much like card show, and I think we talked about this when we interviewed last at the show, was how do we get leagues involved, right? And you saw that at Fanatics Fest. Like, all of the leagues were involved there. Like, you had, the UFC, you had basketball, football, like 40-yard dash, like during the show. Like, where are those experiences during the National? Does the National want to do that? Is there's the old-fashioned card show. We have anybody and everybody in cards that collects, buys, sell, trades, they can come to this show. If Fanatics wants to make it an event for fans, sports fans, and then introduce them to cards. So I think I definitely think they're different in that, but I'm going to be very curious how the National adapts more to kids in the future, because I think Fanatics crushed that area of the show. I think that was just an absolute home run.
I completely agree, and that's an area where the National's got to improve. I mean, we did at our Sports Card Investor booth, we did our Card Kids Trade Zone again this year at the National. It was completely overflowing with kids. There were a lot of kids at the show. You had kids. You had a big line of kids coming up to you at all times, wanting to get photos where you were set up. And our Card Kids Trade Zone was completely overflowing. Here's the crazy thing, Ryan. I said this on my show last week when I was talking to Rich Layden. We Sports Card Investor, wrote the check. We came out of pocket, paid full rate, not discounted rate, paid full rate for extra booth space in order to have a kids trade zone on the floor of the National, because there is no kids trade zone otherwise. There's not going to be one. And so we wrote the check to do it. And then you go to Fanatics Fest and you see how much they had there for kids, how much, as you said, all of these leagues, they had an entire, besides for just what the NFL was doing, what Major League Baseball was doing in the NBA, which was fun for kids, they also had an entire section of the show floor called the Kids Zone. They even had like arts and crafts tables for like kids who just wanted to do arts and crafts and stuff. It was awesome. I was so sad I wasn't able to take my kids to Fanatics Fest because timing-wise, they just started school this last Thursday, so it would have been a bad weekend of travel with them. But I got back from the show, and my wife said, would the kids have liked it? And I said, the kids would have loved it. And frankly, if you gave at least my two younger kids, Harrison and Amelia, the choice between whether they would want to go back to the National or whether they would want to go to Fanatics Fest, if they had gone to Fanatics Fest, they absolutely both would have picked Fanatics Fest. Reeves might have been a little closer it might have been a tie because he's so into the cards that he might have liked the scope of there being more card dealers at the National, and he might have preferred that. But I will say Fanatics Fest had a lot of the modern dealers, and he goes for modern. Fanatics Fest had as good or close to as good of a selection of modern cards as the National did. So he might have picked Fanatics Fest as well, just because he could not only play in the modern card section for, hours a day, but then he could also go throw the football and run the 40-yard dash and do all those other things you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this when we were set up there. You go back to the modern stuff, and I think that's one of the things that stands out for me is Fanatics Fest tries to grow this event. Like, thinking about it now, like, what does Fanatics take away from this event that they try to implement next year? And I look at it as, well, it was a great show. I think they crushed for the first time. I think they would be like, hey, this was awesome for what we wanted to do. For the first time ever doing this, we learned a lot. This was great. Great start. Great pub. I mean, the names walking around, the venue, like, it was top notch. But how do we make it better next time? half the tables in the row we were set up in weren't there. Like, there was 4 booths, 2 of the booths weren't there. To me, those have to be full. And can you fill them at that price point? Right? Like, we talk about modern, we talk about the selection. It was top tier. What is Fanatics' plan to get more people to the show from a card perspective? I felt like there was, like, Friday was pretty slow. Like, it wasn't bad. Saturday was jam-packed. It was nonstop busy. And Sunday was really busy. And that's different than a lot of card shows. Like, normally you go to card shows, they're Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday's a little bit slower. People head out early. Sunday was jam-packed. We actually tried to catch a flight, and it was slammed when we left. But I look at it as, how do we get more collectors, more folks into cards there to buy? Again, that price point experience for everything else versus the cards and growing that piece of it. That's what I'm the most curious about for Fanatics is, again, 4 booths in 1 row. In our row in particular, there were 2 not there. I'm like, how do we get more people there? Is it the price? Again, the booth price was $3,000 plus. That's 3 times the price of the National. Now, you get other stuff with it. The Wi-Fi worked. People would definitely pay money for the Wi-Fi. You don't wait 45 minutes to go to the bathroom. There's other things that come with that. But that's what I just keep playing in my head is, how do we get more people there to buy, sell, transact, and continue to grow the card space at that show?
Yeah, I agree. And that needs that does need to be a little bit different, but at the same time, they were, I think, very successful in bringing in the everyday sports fan. It's not surprising to me that the show was busy on Saturday and Sunday. Sunday is the rare thing, but and not as busy on Friday. But if you think about it from the perspective of the average everyday sports fan, they're probably not taking Friday off work to go to a sports experience. Sports experiences are typically on the weekend. You go to an NFL game on the weekend. You go to a college football game on the weekend, right? And so whereas in the card environment, people often like to go on Friday because they like to get a jump on the show floor and get their card, get the things they want to get out, that type of thing. And then they're often not there on Sunday because the show's closing down. They've already done what they needed to do. And so that just speaks to how the audience was different. I think the way that they need to solve the, getting a little bit more traffic to the card booths is not necessarily to change the mix of who's coming to the show as much as it is working with the placement of the booths to better integrate them with the experiences. My number one piece of feedback that I have for Fanatics coming out of this event is that I didn't like how you walked in the front and then like to the left for the most part was all of the experiences, NBA, NFL, NHL, etc.
Yeah.
And then to the right, you got into the rows of all the card tables. I thought instead it should be more integrated. Now, I'm curious what you think about this idea. I would go as far as suggesting, and I don't think everyone in the card world is going to agree with this, but I would go as far as suggesting I think they should actually break up the card show and they should associate dealers with the sport that they sell the most of, and they should have mini sections of card tables next to the league's activation. So if you sell a lot of football, you're within the NFL zone. If you sell a lot of baseball, you're in the Major League Baseball zone. And you're right there integrated within the interactive events for that particular sport. I would like to see him try that. I don't know. What do you think of that? Is that taking things a step too far?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It definitely speaks to the collector. One of the biggest takeaways I saw was the WWE fans just came out and were just, certainly the most, passionate fan base I saw there. So if you're looking for WWE stuff, if you're going to do the walkout, right, like, oh, hey, there's some WWE cards there. I do like that idea. I think it has potential. Personally, I like being with other card dealers, like all in the same space. So as a card fan, not necessarily a sports fan, I prefer it kind of the way it was set up. I agree with your feedback though around like when you walk in, everything to the left was all the experiences, all of that stuff, and back to the right was that. I was talking to Neo, and he was talking for New York Comic Con. There's like they use multi floors, and I was curious, could in the future, when Fanatics grows this even more, could the card element be its own floor and the experience stuff be one floor itself as they continue to grow? Because if you want to get more boosts in there, like that room, that's one thing I really liked about this room, is I never felt like crowded, overwhelmed. Like it was perfect amount of space. The aisles were great. The traffic was great. That is one thing I take away from this, is just that venue itself and everything Fanatics put into that with the help. I mean, you walk in, I know we're going back to the very first point, but like you walk in and like you see Will Call right there, and there had to have been 50 people at Will Call ready to help. I mean, anybody and everybody asking about questions. Then you walk in and there's tons of security, tons of armed security. There's a million people helping. There's volunteers. Like the amount of people at that event, they did absolutely great job on that. But if we continue to cram it and condense it all in one floor, can you get in there? I don't know. I started thinking about like what's the best way to grow it, as this is obviously going to get, Fanatics isn't like, cool, this is where we want to be. They want to continue to elevate it. I don't know. Going back to the original point, I'm not sure the best way to do it if you continue to grow, if there's not more room in the same venue. Like, how do you kind of maximize growing it while keeping it, flowing in the best way possible?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where it evolves. And just to update the audience on this, I've heard, and this is not 100% confirmed, but I've heard that Fanatics is doing a Fanatics Fest of this scope. They're doing regional events. Like they got a regional event coming up in Orlando, for example, but that's going to be smaller. That's not going to have all the sports team activations. That's more of a true card show. The really big Fanatics Fest that we just saw, we just experienced. They've got an LA version of it that I've heard might be in March of next year. I've also heard that they're going to be back in New York for another one of these, likely same time, likely in August again next year. So it sounds like they're going to be going New York and LA, kind of rotating, with LA being in the spring and New York being, kind of end of the summer is what I understand. And I've also heard that they're going to be doing a London version of this at some point in the future as well. That's going to really tie into their soccer, Premier League exclusive that they just recently signed and everything like that. So that will be an interesting thing as well. So I think we're going to see a few of these a year, and they definitely want to grow them. And so I think you will see growth. I think you will see an expansion. It's interesting what you said. Do you put cards on one floor and all the experiences on the other? I don't know about that. I guess in some ways that would appeal, I guess, maybe more to the true card people that come, that they have their own floor of cards. But I really think the magic of what was successful about this Fanatics Fest is there were many first-time non-collectors buying cards and boxes for the first time in the card section. At Cards HQ, we were fortunate. The placement of our booth was kind of right towards the front of the card section. It was amongst where the cards were closest to the experiences. So we got a lot of kind of spillover traffic of people kind of wandering back into the card section, looking around. And so, we were on one of the very first aisles for them to come to. We sold a lot of cards and boxes to people who showed up at the booth and said, okay, I've never bought a card before. Tell me about this. Or I've never bought a box before. What are the differences between all these boxes? We got pegged with that question a ton of times over the course of the weekend. And I think that is probably one of Fanatics' biggest measures of success with this event. How many of those first-timers did they get over there? Because obviously with their stated goal of 10xing the number of collectors, one of the big ways to do that, as we've talked about before, is to bring the average everyday sports fan into collecting. Some of that happened at this event. Some of it definitely happened. I witnessed it firsthand. If you were to further integrate the dealer tables into the experiences, I think it could happen even more. If you were to separate the dealer tables down, I think you would get that spillover happening a little bit less. So, it would be a different audience. It would appeal more to the card people, appeal less to maybe the everyday sports fan crossing over. So I don't know. It's interesting though. It's going to be very interesting to see how this evolves and where all of this goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now that you say that and start breaking it down, I agree completely. Yeah, I think that's what Fanatics is looking for, and that's what I think a lot are looking for is having that everyday collector get that exposure to cards, and what's the best way to use this mecca sports event to do that and to expose the everyday fan to trading cards. I think that's what they're going to look for, and I think, like you said, separating them on two floors doesn't get anybody curious enough to be like, "Ooh, I'll go check out this." I think if they're all in the same building and you stumble from experience to cards, it's a little bit more of a natural progression and is likelier to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I want to talk about the stage setup, the Topps hobby stage. I thought that was, I thought that was really interesting. And to set the stage, literally set the stage for people who are listening who didn't go to the show, what they did was Topps had a stage that was right kind of at the front of the card section. Like it was as close as possible to the experiences. And they set it up as a stage in the round. There were seats going all the way around circling the stage. And they, above the stage, had like 4 hanging television screens, large TVs, almost like a Jumbotron hanging from the middle of a basketball arena. It was that style, so that you could see the video of what was happening on the stage from pretty far away from the stage. And they had good sound, so you could hear it for quite a distance as well. That was the first time I have ever seen a stage executed at any card show that I felt was well executed, and there a bunch of people in the audience actually stopped and sat down and listen to what the people had to say. You were on stage. I saw you on stage a couple of times. I was on stage once, and people actually watched and people actually sat down. The National has a stage, but it's off on the side. It's kind of away from the action. It's on the edge of the show floor. And my experience at the National stage has been, it feels like a little bit of an afterthought. People don't clamor over there, maybe with the exception of if there's some super huge break taking place or something, you'll see a bigger crowd. But most of my experiences on the National stage have been, it kind of felt like off to the side and kind of far away. Also, the National, by the way, utilizes that stage for like their sponsors and stuff like that. So the content on the stage is often not particularly compelling content. It's kind of sponsored content and that kind of stuff. Whereas Topps said, let's use the stage for education. Let's try to get big name people on the stage. Let's try to get content creators like you and me on the stage. Let's try to get Gary Vee on the stage, which they did, and DJ Ski and other interesting people, in the space on the stage to educate, to do giveaways, to entertain. They did a big break on the stage on Sunday. I thought that was really successful. I didn't know that a stage at a card show could ever really be successful, but in this case, I actually thought it was quite successful. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, I thought the stage was great. Like you said, you think about it at the National and you think where the stage is. It's normally hidden in the Breakers Pavilion, well away from the show floor, where anybody on the show floor buying and selling can't see it. So yeah, I thought the stage was great. Like you said, it was placed perfectly. It was right as like you're entering the card space, and it's surrounded. Like you said, there's chairs and tables set up where you can sit down in that particular area, but you could hear it from the actual card tables itself. Like where Cards HQ was. Like you're right on the. You're not actually in that little. That stage area, you're right outside of it, but you could hear it there. You could go back another aisle, you could hear it. The Jumbotrons allowed you to see it. So, I thought, like you said, that educational content, Jay, Mojo, and I got to sit down and talk about, our topic was the art of a deal, negotiating in sports cards. And, it was fun. It was like the first time I'd ever got to do that it doesn't happen at shows or, anything where you can sit there and talk about what it's like to negotiate, how you do that, do a mock deal, and get the crowd involved. Like that just does not happen at other shows. So I thought it was really cool. And then, like you said, there was you got to speak and talk, and Dana White, excuse me if I'm wrong, like Dana White was up there,
crashed the stage.
Yeah,
that was incredible.
That's cool. Like, and I think that was one thing. I know this is a little bit of a different topic, but on the Dana White thing, like the people walking around at that show, like you saw them on stage, like the Blaze break at the very end, the break of the decade or century, whatever they called it, like, you had Peyton Manning, you had Quavo, you had Michael Rubin, like you had a bunch of names on the stage ripping packs and taking part of that, on top of ripping some of the coolest product in the entire industry. Thought it was really cool. I thought the stage was something I was a little hesitant on at first. I'm like, stage, will people be paying attention? Like, what will people think about this? Like, a lot of people are there that are for card collectors or there to buy and sell cards. Like, it's a monetary thing. But I thought it was a really, really nice addition to the show.
Yeah, I was hesitant for the same reason, but it was great. And, that's another thing with this show. Like, Fanatics' mission is to grow the hobby. Their mission is to grow the number of collectors because, of course, that benefits them, right? If the collector base grows 5x, 10x, then they're selling 5x, 10x more product. So they're doing things like providing the stage for educational purposes to try to get people in and get them learning about all of this. The National doesn't have that same motivation. Like, the National's not a for-profit company that is tied into the growth of the hobby. The National serves its dealers. Like, the National's customer, like the stakeholders of the National are the dealers who are, setting up the tables at the National, and the dealers don't necessarily share in the motivation to grow the hobby. Some do because they would love to see it grow. Others probably don't really give a damn. And so they don't want to give up prime floor space where tables could go that dealers have waited in line for 30 or 40 years to have a right to have a table in the prime space near the door. They don't want to give that up to put up a big stage for educational content because that's not their mission. But that's a shame. It's a lost opportunity, and it's something that's going to bolster this Fanatics event, and it's something that's going to kind of hold the National back unless they can get that stuff figured out. And I know it's tough for them because they're not owned by a company driving it. They're an association that's, a collective of all of these dealers. And so it's a challenge, but I do hope that some of the ideas that were executed well at Fanatics Fest, I do hope that other card shows take notice. And while they certainly are never going to be able to do all the things Fanatics Fest does, like obviously the NFL experience is not coming to the Dallas Card Show, and that's okay. It doesn't need to do that. But like, I do hope they see some of these things and think about like, that was pretty cool. That worked pretty good. Could we do some version of that within our own card show, and maybe that can help that card show elevate somewhat?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could get into this for a long time on, what Fanatics Fest did that the National doesn't. I mean, again, some of the simple things with the National, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but, if you're in the Breakers Pavilion, if you're in the corporate area, you can't sell cards. We're at the biggest card show in the world, and Geoff Wilson can't have trading cards, and 250,000+ people follow Geoff Wilson on YouTube, and Geoff Wilson can't sell a trading card because he's in a corporate spirit, not on the dealer. Like, the goal is to have the best card show for everyone in the hobby. And Geoff Wilson not being able to sell a sports card because he's in the corporate booth is the silliest, most outdated thing in the entire world. Like, let's just call a spade on that. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, we have all of the show floor, so how do we make the show as best as possible? Like, how do we make the National the best card show in the world to level or rival some of these Fanatics Fest events? And the fact that like there's rules like that, it just tells you how far behind it is from like being where it needs to be. And I hope that continues to develop, because I just think about that. I'm like, you've got there. It's not the same venue. It's not the same setup as Fanatics Fest, right? They're definitely different. And like you said, the venues are not even comparable to where the Javits Center was. But it's like the stage being tucked away in the corner, the Breakers Pavilion, the corporate areas not being able to sell cards. It is that really the best way to elevate the hobby and to grow this card show and to build it into what we're trying to build it into? Don't know.
And I don't think previous management of the National cared about some of that as an objective. The National has new management. This was the first year of the new management of the National, but they were already handed the contract at Cleveland, and they were handed the contract in Chicago, so they didn't have any control over that.
And I do want to say, like, the new management, I've had the privilege to talk to those guys a few times. Like, I think they are moving it in the right direction, and I was a part of some of the meetings to get booth space and some of that, and I've heard them talk about it, and I don't have any doubt in my mind that they are doing what they can to move it in the right direction. Like, this is not like they got it, and I think we got to be clear, like, this is not they got it and they're like, well, we're just going to continue to do this. Those guys run some of the best card shows in the country now, so they're doing anything and everything they can to do it, and it doesn't happen overnight, so we're understanding that this is a patient game. I'm hopeful, like, I want to say one of them was at the Fanatics Fest, so I'm hopeful that, like, they saw it and change it, and I have the confidence they will. But again, I just wanted to preface that, like you said, this was not something they're just like, yep, we're just going to continue status quo. They're trying to do those things, but like you said, it seems like it's been a little bit slower because there is new management in there. But I think some of these things will happen. I think you will start to see more changes with the National, and I think Fanatics Fest is going to hopefully give the National some ideas on, hey, these are different things that went well, we should put in our show.
I agree. And I do have confidence in the new management team in the National. I'm glad to hear they were there. I didn't see them there. I'm glad that you saw them there. I was hoping that they were there observing and taking note of some things that could be brought back to the National to improve it. So that's good news. I do think they care about making the National better for sure. Do you think, Ryan, that the National, so at this moment, Fanatics Fest and the National do seem like different shows in terms of hitting a different audience and kind of a different lineup of things occurring at the shows. As you look out like over the next 5 years, do you think they continue to coexist as different shows like that? Do you think that the National will kind of continue to be the National and Fanatics Fest will continue to be Fanatics Fest, and they will both continue to be very popular, maybe hitting different audiences? Or do you see one of the shows kind of eating into the other? Can these shows coexist forever if they're both taking place in August, 3 weeks from one another, which I think is what's going to be happening for the next few years?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think that's the $1,000,000 question, is how do the two biggest events in sports cards, I mean, like you said, Burbank and Dallas are certainly up there, but how do the two biggest shows at the moment coexist with each other 3 weeks apart from each other? I want to say the answer is yes, because I think they're attracting a different audience. I think Fanatics Fest was great for the sports fan, building the sports card space in it. I think they did an amazing job for round one. I think the National is very specific for trading cards for the collectible space, and I think they will continue to coexist. I definitely think they'll both continue to coexist. I think that's the answer. It's going to be interesting to me is how do they take what the other one did well and use that to implement in their show and hope. I mean, they say they don't want to compete with each other, but they're 3 weeks apart, and it seems like they're going to compete with each other for the next couple of years. Like, it seems like Fanatics Fest is going to be the same time, 3 weeks post-National. The National doesn't appear to be changing dates. Like, whether they want to compete or not, they're going to compete. Like, we talked about that earlier. Going to New York, we got there Wednesday. You stay till Sunday, right? Like, hotels are $300+ a night. Flights are expensive. It's expensive to set up or to get in. It's not like $500 get you there for 3 days. Like, it costs a good amount of money. So will the average everyday collector be able to go to both of them that close? Like, time off of work, time away from life. Like, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I'm very, very curious to see. I think that's the $1,000,000 question. I think for the short term, they will continue to coexist. I don't expect the National attendance to drop significantly because Fanatics Fest is 3 weeks later. I'm curious your thoughts on this. This is the $1,000,000 question, I think, right now.
It is. I think they're both going to continue to be very popular events for the short term. I think you're going to get huge turnouts at the National. I think you're going to get huge turnouts at Fanatics Fest. What I do wonder in the long term is if Fanatics Fest expands and brings on more card dealers. If Fanatics Fest says we want to double the size of the area where cards are, and if everybody's having this kind of, really good experience at Fanatics Fest with all the other stuff going on, it becomes a favorite for families with kids. Do some people start skipping the National to go to Fanatics Fest? I could see that starting to happen over time unless the National makes some changes and upgrades, makes it more of a kids-friendly event, makes it more of a family-friendly event, and puts it in better places in the future that are better for kids and families as well. I think unless the National does that, I think Fanatics Fest over time could actually start to hurt the attendance of the National. I don't think it's going to happen yet, but I could see that occurring in the long run. So hopefully that doesn't happen. I would love to see both of these great shows continue to grow and thrive in their own way. But I do think the National has to evolve and stay up with the times in order for that to occur. All right, Ryan, we've talked for a good bit. I'm going to end this with one final question to you. As you're thinking about 2025 now, and you're starting to plan for 2025, how would you approach the National? CardCollector2, your card shop, content, all that type of stuff. How are you going to approach the National? How are you going to approach Fanatics Fest? And has any of that changed based on going through the experience of both of these shows here over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think, we didn't know what to expect for Fanatics Fest this time, right? So we set up, we had a booth, weren't really sure what to kind of expect being in New York 3 weeks after the National, first time they'd ever run it, how big will the card scene be? A lot of just unknowns, like you just don't know. We knew what the National was just from being there, but it was the first time we had ever set up in the Breakers Pavilion, had our own booth. We put a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of resources into that booth. You know what that's like. You guys have space every year. So I don't think it'll really change much of our National setup. Our goal is still to exhibit, to elevate the hobby, to be able to meet, interact, deal with the collectors we deal with every day. Like I think that is still our goal is to be out there, talking about our brand, who we are, what we do. I still think that's the goal. I just think this becomes an expensive 1 month. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
We are in sports cards. That's what our business is. We obviously make content, but like this is a card company, so I don't want to miss the biggest card show in the world. But Fanatics is. I mean, let's just be clear. We're 2 years away from Topps having the NFL, and 2.5 years. 2 years.
No,
yeah,
1.5. No, it's quicker than that.
1.5 years.
Yeah, we're not far
from them having the NBA license, the MLB license. Most of the licensing. They're going to be the big player in this. They want to grow this. They want more collectors. They want to 10x the hobby. Like you said, they have incentive to do that. So to say that Fanatics Fest isn't going to take this and learn and put resources and time and energy behind making it even better next time, that would be foolish to say. I'm not going to sit here and ever say that. I don't think either one of us would ever agree. It's going to continue to grow. Fanatics has shown that is part of their MO, is doing something once, learning from it, and continuing to develop it. You've seen it up with a lot of things they've done. And I expect it to be even better next time, so we will be there next time. That's I just think now for us, it's now just an expensive month, and you go all out for two massive shows 3 weeks apart from each other.
It's going to be a lot of fun, but we all better budget accordingly. I agree with you there for sure. Awesome, Ryan. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate all of your insights as always, and thanks again for joining the Geoff Wilson Show.
Thanks for having me, Geoff.
All right, guys, thanks for watching that interview with Ryan. He was great as always, and just wanted to remind you, this show has a podcast form available on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so make sure you are subscribed there so you can listen on the go. And of course, the full-length YouTube videos are on the Geoff Wilson Show channel on YouTube. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you soon in the next one. Take care.